Hinderaker, welcome to Outsiders. So glad to meet you properly.
Hi, Rowan. Glad to be with you.
Excellent. Now, listen, the Powerline blog is fantastic reading. I urge people to go and check it out. Some of the great stories there at the moment that you've got, one, which is a tantalising headline, is coronavirus actually saving lives? What were you talking about?
Yeah, well, I don't think coronavirus is saving lives, but there's a weird thing going on that people are starting to talk about. The Centers for Disease Control routinely puts out statistics on overall mortality in the United States. You know, on the average in the U.S., every day about 8,000 people die for, all kinds of reasons. And the weird thing is that during this alleged crisis of the coronavirus, to read the newspapers, you would think it was the Black Death, But if you look at the Centers for Disease Control statistics from January until about the middle of April, which is what they've been updated to, there are actually, it's just deaths from all causes, between 37,000 and 38,000 fewer deaths this year than there were a year ago. Wow. And so people are kind of scratching their heads about, well, what the heck? We're supposed to be having this terrible fatal disease, and yet these routine statistics appear to show that actually fewer Americans are dying rather than more. Well, obviously, COVID-19 doesn't save anybody's life. It's a disease. It's a bad thing. We all get that. But I think part of what is going on here is that this image that various people try to portray of COVID-19 as this dreaded killer is kind of ridiculous. So far in the U.S., by a very liberal definition, by the way, the CDC has deliberately liberalized the definition and urged doctors to start counting more deaths as being attributable to COVID-19. But even under that liberal definition, so far we've had about 50,000 fatalities that have been classified as COVID-19. Now, 2 years ago, the annual seasonal flu in the U.S., according again to the CDC, killed 62,000 Americans. So we're still not at a level with COVID-19 where we were just 2 years ago with the seasonal flu. That wasn't even a news story. And so I think that's at least a big part of what is going on here. We're just not seeing an overall increase in mortality as a result of this disease.
Rita.
Now, we know the majority of cases and deaths in the US are in New York and New Jersey, and there's other states who are far less impacted that want to get back to business. We've got Georgia, Texas, a bunch of states who say we want to restart the economy. Tell us about that divide and the protests that are happening in the US as well, of people saying enough of the lockdown.
Well, let me just give you the example of my state. Our governor ordered a very draconian lockdown on the basis of a model which people in Minnesota came up with that predicted that without a lockdown, there would be 74,000 deaths from the coronavirus. With the lockdown, they said there would still be 50,000 deaths in my state alone from coronavirus. In fact, we have had exactly 200 deaths. 75% of those 200 have been people who are in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. And the median age of death in my state, those 200 people, not 50,000, 200, the median age of death has been 83. And so our governments, our federal government and mostly our state governments, are just devastating our economy. But what that means is they're devastating the lives of hundreds of millions of people over something that may be a crisis if you're living in a nursing home, but if you're not, it just isn't.
James.
So I just want to follow up on that. What is the prognosis, as it were, for getting out of this? I am deeply concerned, as someone who grew up in America, as an American myself, about where this goes with the American economy. Will we see the red and blue states going completely different paths on this? And At what point does this wind up just becoming so bad that everybody has to wind up coming out of it? Will it be that when more professional jobs are threatened, when more of the class that has been cheering for the lockdown starts to get hurt, that they start to say maybe it's time to liberalize things? And will it be really by that point too late?
Well, the damage that's being done is unbelievable, and some of the damage is irreversible. There are many, many companies that have shut down by government order that are never going to reopen. Thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses. A lot of the damage, I think, is permanent and irreversible. We are seeing resistance. Initially, it was kind of amazing to me how people just like sheep obey these orders. We're doing it for the public good and so on. And for a while that works, but people are starting to get restive. We're seeing demonstrations around the country. There has been a bit of a red state, blue state divide. For example, my home state of South Dakota refused to order a shutdown, said South Dakotans are intelligent, they can protect themselves, they have rights as Americans. I'm not shutting down our state. And that entire state so far has had 8 deaths from coronavirus, 8, and there are all these predictions of disaster because she refused to shut down all commercial and social activity. So I think what's going to happen is that over the next couple of weeks, as the weather warms up and people want to be outside, they don't want to be stuck in their houses, I think that the resistance is really going to develop. And I think whether you're a red state or a blue state or a purple state, governors don't want their state's economies to be completely destroyed. And so I think what we're going to see is a lifting of these shutdown orders that's going to accelerate pretty rapidly. And hopefully we can get this country back to work by, early summer.
John, we were speaking to Colonel Richard Kemp earlier, who was pretty down about China. I was interested in something on Powerline blog about bringing Taiwan back in from the cold. I think this is particularly fascinating, particularly for Australia. There's a lot of great Australian Taiwanese, as well as Australian Chinese who live here. What has been interesting is to see how even one of our airlines stopped mentioning the word Taiwan. Oh, no, it's part of China. We've had the World Health Organization, that clown there, refused to even acknowledge that Taiwan existed. So tell us about the importance of bringing Taiwan back in from the cold, John.
Well, there's been this one China policy where our government has never quite wanted to recognize Taiwan for what it really is, which is a really well-functioning democracy, an advanced economy, and at this point, an independent country. And I think one thing that a lot of Americans have been struck by is how not just incompetent, but dishonest and malicious and tyrannical communist China has been in dealing with this virus and, arresting doctors that tried to tell the truth about it. And on the other hand, what a model Taiwan has been, how great they've done, how they've limited casualties from the virus, how they've been open and democratic. And I think maybe this is something that will cause people to rethink and say, what the heck, Taiwan is our friend. The communist Chinese are not our friends, right? Taiwan is our friend, and they're an advanced country and with a solid economy and a good democracy. And maybe we should just go ahead and recognize them. That's what I would like to see.
Absolutely. James.
I just want to ask about how President Trump is going with all of this. Before you came on, we were talking about the confected outrage over the disinfectant comments. But is he managing the crisis well, do you think? Do you think that these news conferences he does are helping, or are they starting to hurt him? And where are things with Joe Biden in all of this? I think Trump said that he was, this lazy guy, sleepy guy in a basement, and everybody's concerned about that. But some of the polls suggest that Biden could be in with a shot. Can you just give us your take on the campaign and where we are?
Well, let me start with Biden. Number one, he's the most irrelevant man in America. I mean, nobody cares about Joe Biden's videos from his basement. And I mean, nobody. There's a lot of speculation the Democrats will try to get him off the ticket, replace him with somebody else. One problem is they haven't got anybody else. And don't worry about the polls. It's so early. At this stage, back in 1984, Walter Mondale was leading Ronald Reagan. In 1988, Michael Dukakis was leading George H.W. Bush. I mean, the polls at this stage don't mean anything. here's what I think about President Trump. Number one, I think he's overreacted like everybody in this country. All of our levels of government have overreacted to this virus. And to some extent, he was locked in by the fact that the Centers for Disease Control, this guy, Dr. Fauci, who we've all seen, they're alarmists. It's kind of their job to be alarmists. And so Trump felt that he had to go along with what these federal bureaucrats were saying. And so I think he's overreacted. But I think at the same time, most people understand that it's Trump who wants to get the country moving again. And it's some of these governors, mostly Democratic governors, not 100%, who are trying to keep the country locked down. So I think to some extent, Trump has got himself on the right side of that issue. But here's the bottom line.
Fantastic.
Any president,
Sorry, John, I've got to leave it there. I'm really